vamos a ver esto, ¿no? Vamos a ver qué nos trajeron ayer, el directo, que no me perdí, porque empecé a verlo. Aguanté un poquito hasta la hora de inicio de esto, pero no pude verlo entero, ¿vale? Pero sí que es verdad que junto con el material de la versión 1.3 que ya vimos ayer, de todo lo que habían actualizado y demás, pues, oye, los cambios parecen guay. Además parece que han escuchado a la comunidad. Varias quejas de las que dijimos aquí se ven que eran compartidas con varias personas de diferentes que han hecho diferentes pruebas. Cómo estoy hoy con el hilo. Y ayer al principio pues se vio claramente que estaban prestando especial atención a ese feedback, ¿vale? Entonces lo que vamos a hacer directamente es, porque he visto que el vídeo dura 1 hora y 20, ¿vale? Yo me casqué ayer quizás los primeros 20 minutos, la primera media hora, no lo sé, ¿vale? Pero lo que vamos a hacer es pasar directamente a lo que nos interesa, que es el minuto... ¿Vale? Vamos a... ¿Tienen subtítulos? Ah, están generados. Bueno, nos sirve. Entonces, ¿qué voy a hacer? Voy a quitar la musiquita y vamos a ver qué es lo que nos ofrecen los chicos de Critical Role, ¿vale? Entonces, vamos a ver qué traen.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Mercer. I'm one of the contributing designers on DAGGERHEART.
And I'm Spencer Stark. I'm the lead designer on the game.
Indeed. So, a big thank you.
Matthew Mercer, Spencer Stark, colaborador y... Bueno, estaba ahí abajo. No sé si se ha traducido bien. Ah, sí, vale, diseñador principal del juego, así que muchas gracias por estar aquí.
To everyone who's been diving into this playtest and for giving us amazing feedback in both your player and GM surveys for this. Our entire team...
Que es gracioso porque una de las cosas que yo dije, que se lo mandé porque yo no vi que hubiese una sección dentro de la encuesta, yo no vi que hubiese una sección especial para Game Master, puesto que es la parte que me tocaría a mí, ¿vale? Pero estaba aquí, ¿vale? Era una sección aparte. Fallo mío. Evidentemente la rellené ayer, ¿vale? Continuamos.
By this motherfucker right here has been hard at work implementing important updates and laying the foundation for future tests and improvements. And version 1.3 is now available at daggerheart.com,
ya la vimos ayer.
RPG, and Demiplane's Daggerheart Nexus. So we have...
Que por cierto, Demiplane Nexus es la aplicación, para el que no lo sepa. Son comentarios rápidos que creo que ya a partir de aquí voy a dejar que corra todo lo que dicen, toda la charla que tienen y demás. Esto, un segundito, que se ha movido. Ah, no me gusta esto. What? ¿Qué está pasando? Ah, ahora, vale, pues nada. Que eso, Demiplane Nexus es la aplicación en la que están colaborando con esta gente de que se pueden crear jugadores, se pueden correr juegos con la beta abierta, ¿vale? Si le queréis echar un vistazo, es totalmente gratuito. Puedes crear hasta un máximo de 7 personajes. Y, oye, yo lo recomiendo, la verdad.
A handy changelog in the PDF files and on daggerheart.com that helps give all of you a full overview of the changes that are in this new version. So we cannot wait to see what you think, and please bring us your surveys at daggerheart.com/play. But today...
me voy a quitar de aquí para que veáis los subtítulos, ¿verdad? Sí.
Today we're going to be discussing exactly the universal changes for 1.3 and take some of the questions from you guys in the Twitch chat and the YouTube chats at the end to discuss this.
Yeah. So we're going to be going over sort of the new 1.3 files, sort of an overview of like what the changes are. We're not going to cover everything. There are a number of changes, you know, that you'll have to read through on your own, but we're going to kind of cover the high level stuff for you.
Yeah.
So both of those, by the way, are available. Both the types of files are available on the download, meaning that like you can download the full 1.3 doc with like all of the cards and all of the subclasses, everything, all the character sheets. Or if you've already printed stuff out, you can download just the files you need to update your 1.2 doc. So if you've like gone through the trouble of printing all the domain cards, we have just updated cards in their own file.
Así no tienes que descargarlo todo cada 2x3.
I think. Make sure to view the pinned comment in both chats to see how to flag your questions for us at the end of this so we can get to them.
Yeah.
And we hope today will prepare you to jump into the new 1.3 materials and get playtesting. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. The big six are kind of the major big changes that we're talking about for this. The first one refers to damage thresholds, stress, and the armor systems. The kind of the whole damage system of Daggerheart, if you want to.
Totally. So hearing the feedback that you all had, one of the things that we did is we decoupled hit points and stress a little bit. There was a flow of taking damage that had, from what we saw in the feedback, like one step a little bit too far in like how people had to think about what the way they would apply damage to their character. So what we did is we removed the rule that when you take damage below your minor threshold, that you mark.
Buenas. Vale, esto es importante. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Estamos repasando el directo que hicieron ayer, que no me lo pude ver, de la versión 1.3 de DAGGERHEART, de todas las actualizaciones que han tenido con las normas y demás. Y esto que acaba de decir es interesante. The rule that when you take damage below your minor threshold, that you mark a stress. No entiendo por qué.
What that did is it rippled down to now minor thresholds being mostly 1. The number is mostly 1 now on the character sheets. Guardians and other tanky kind of characters have the opportunity to raise that, but if they ever take damage below their minor threshold, now you just don't take any damage.
No.
A ver, entiendo que no puedo hablar por todas las clases ni el resto de personajes, porque lo que probamos en la party fue una sección limitada. Fue, si no me equivoco, un mago, un rogue y un arquero, ¿vale? Entonces era gracioso porque ellos podían utilizar ese estrés que recibían cuando eran golpeados por debajo de su rango menor de daño, y lo podían utilizar para acciones. Entonces no entiendo muy bien por qué han eliminado eso. Y ahora directamente que no marcas absolutamente nada. Pero bueno, lo probaremos este sábado. A ver qué tal.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, which is really cool. In the playtest, it seemed to work really well. We're excited to see what you think of it. But that also, of course, changed the stress economy.
No es eliminada, es ajustada. Porque lo que estaban haciendo... voy a sacar el Paint para explicar esto. Porque es un poco raro. La modificación que han hecho es un poco rara. Yo no termino de entender qué es exactamente cuál es la motivación que les ha llevado a realizar ese cambio. Pero, oye, se puede... Está en una beta. Ahora mismo es normal, porque lo que están haciendo es probar cosas. Entonces, se entiende. ¿Vale? Entonces, lo que han hecho es, antes, lo que había era un rango, ¿vale? De daño. Esto es rango de daño, ¿vale? En el cual vamos a suponer que esto es el menor, esto es el mayor y esto es el severo. Si tu rango menor es 3, el de tu mayor es 7 y tu severo es 12, ¿vale? Vamos a ponerlo así. Si tú, cuando te entra el daño que te hace un enemigo, está entre 3 y 7, dentro de tus puntos de vida que tienes, ¿vale? Pues si está en el rango menor, te marcas un punto de vida. Si el daño está entre mayor y severo, es decir, entre 7 y 12 puntos de daño, te marcas 2 puntos de vida. Y si es mayor de severo, te marcas 3 puntos de vida. Y si es el severo por 2, estás completamente KO, ¿vale? Entonces, esta es la contextualización. Si tú recibías menor por debajo de tu daño, de tu rango menor, es decir, menos de 3, hay una sección en la hoja de personaje que se llama estrés. Que este estrés es otra economía líquida que le permite a los personajes gastarla para hacer acciones, para hacer algún movimiento, para castear algún conjuro o cualquier historia. ¡Hombre, Luna! ¿Qué tal? ¿Cuánto tiempo? Entonces, lo que han hecho antes, como estaba, era que si tú recibías menor que el daño menor, te marcabas un estrés. Simplemente. Entonces, si tú recibías constantemente durante el combate, me lo voy a inventar, 3 ataques de 2 puntos de daño, que se puede dar perfectamente, pues tú marcabas 1, 2 y 3. ¿Vale? Entonces ahora lo que han hecho es, lo han mantenido todo exactamente igual. El daño que tú recibes entre los rangos te quita un punto de vida, 2, 3, dependiendo de cuál sea. Pero ahora lo que han hecho es, si tú recibes menos que el menor, esto no existe. No existe. Existe el estrés, pero no te marcas un estrés. ¿Por qué esto es raro? Porque a mí me resulta extraño que hayan hecho esto. Porque una mecánica chula que a mí me gusta, es que cuando tú tienes todo el estrés cubierto y no te puedes marcar más, este estrés que debería de estar marcado y no puedes, pasa a ser un punto de vida. Entonces, si no te queda más estrés por marcar, te empiezas a eliminar puntos de vida. Eso es guay, porque eso provocaba tensión. ¿Tensión en qué? En el que ahora la economía varía un poco, en el que el jugador tiene que estar completamente pendiente en, oye, yo puedo marcarme estrés para hacer acciones, pero también me tengo que quitar estrés de alguna forma para sobrevivir, porque si llego al final de mi estrés, empiezo a quitarme de puntos de vida y cosas así. Entonces, que hayan hecho este cambio, no entiendo muy bien por qué ha sido, sobre todo teniendo en cuenta que los enemigos siguen estando demasiado OPs. Siguen estando con demasiado poder. Entonces, ya digo, si como él ha dicho, afecta a otras clases, como el Seraph, que es una especie de paladín angelical muy chulo, por lo que he leído sobre el papel, es muy chulo en este juego. Si afecta al Seraph o al Guardián, oye, no lo sé porque no lo he probado. Pero, tío, la mecánica a mí no me desagradaba. Me parecía muy bien hilada y muy bien equilibrada con respecto al jugador. Ahora, que en niveles superiores, a partir de nivel 5, que ya empiezan las cosas a ponerse interesantes, ¿esa economía está desequilibrada? No lo sé. Habría estado guay poder llegar a nivel 5 o nivel 10 antes de hacer este cambio de la versión a la 1.3 para ver cómo afectaba. Pero no pasa nada. De momento, ya digo, de momento me parece raro. No la han eliminado. No la han cambiado por completo, pero la han modificado lo suficiente como para que a mí, particularmente, me resulte un poco extraña, me haga levantar un poco la ceja. Pero bueno.
We did bump the number of stress that you get up to 6.
Esa es otra. También han cambiado ahora el número de estrés mínimos que puede tener. Antes eran 4 o 5 y ahora son 6. Entonces, lo dicho, es una beta, es modificar cosas para ver qué funciona y qué no funciona, obviamente. Y se entiende que están teniendo ahora mismo feedback, pero a reventar, tanto por las encuestas, como por el propio Twitter, como por todos lados.
Slots up to 6, number of hope up to 6, so we sort of standardize all of those a little bit. And the stress mechanic now, if you ever fill it completely, you're vulnerable.
Correct.
So, just a little bit of a...
Esto es otro cambio. No entiendo por qué. Han dicho... Coño, sí, me viene hasta bien que haya sacado el Paint para explicar esto, tío. Lo que acaban de decir es que... ¿Dónde está el Paint? Lo he vuelto a perder, tío. ¿Por qué lo pierdo? Okay. Lo que han dicho es que, como acabo de decir, el estrés, cuando llegabas al máximo y no podías acumular más estrés, empezabas a quitarte puntos de vida. Pero ahora, esto no es así. Ahora lo que es si tú llegas a marcar este último punto de estrés, el siguiente punto de estrés lo que te hace es que te da la condición de vulnerable. Vulnerable, que es una condición. Que esta condición lo único que hace es que yo, al atacarte con mis adversarios, yo tengo ventaja. Punto. Creo. No me jodas que se me acaba de joder la tableta. Por poco. Voy a confirmar esto, ¿vale? Un segundito. Error por mi parte el no tenerlo abierto. ¿Vale? Vulnerable. He dicho vulnerable. Vale, yo creo que si busco conditions va a resultar incluso más rápido. 23. Vale. Condiciones. Vulnerable. This means you are temporarily in a difficult position within the fiction. This might mean you are in October scrambling to keep your balance. Exacto. Tienen ventaja, ¿vale? Entonces, no sé. Es un poco extraño, la verdad. Ese cambio. Es como que... A ver, entiendo que lo hayan hecho también. Porque es una forma de bufar a los jugadores en contra de los adversarios, que como he dicho, no he parado de decir durante una semana, vamos, yo y mucha gente, por lo que estoy viendo, los adversarios, los que yo manejo como Game Master, están extremadamente OP. Pero vamos, de locos. Entonces es una forma de decir, tío, vamos a ponérselo un poquito más difícil al Game Master, o más fácil a los jugadores.
Cool. We'll talk about the social
A little bit, yeah, but the stress indicating at full to a vulnerable state has a lot of really cool applications in the game.
Yeah.
And for the armor systems as well,
Yeah.
The general armor scores across the board have been lessened, but with the addition of 3 more armor slots at the get-go, you have more opportunities to use it.
Esa es otra cosa que han hecho. La armadura, por norma general, si tienes una armadura ligera, si no recuerdo mal, te daba una defensa de 5, que eso es lo que te hacía... Voy a sacar el paint otra vez. La armadura lo que te hacía era... Coño, ¿dónde he puesto el lápiz? Aquí. La armadura lo que hacía era, si tú tenías una armadura de 5, tú tenías espacio de armaduras. ¿Vale? Como los puntos de vida, pero espacio de armaduras. Entonces, cuando te entraba este daño que te afectaba al rango de daño para tu personaje, tú podías optar por marcar una armadura de estas y este 5 de armadura, o el número de armadura que sea, se restaba a este daño entrante, ¿vale? Y era el que se ajustaba al siguiente al rango que fuese, ¿vale? Entonces, lo que han hecho ahora ha sido, no he visto todavía cuáles son los números, pero han reducido esta cantidad, vamos a suponer que si antes era 5, ahora es 3, pero han aumentado el número de veces que puede el personaje utilizar esa armadura. Es bien porque hay veces... porque una de las cosas que me he dado cuenta es que una de las premisas que dijeron esta gente cuando sacaron el juego es que los combates rara vez iban a superar las 2 rondas. Que recordemos que este juego no tiene rondas, sino que tiene acciones, ¿vale? Combinadas, fluidas con la narrativa, bla, 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 bla. ¿Vale? Entonces decían que sí, era raro que un combate durara más de esas 2 rondas y que cuando duraba más de esas 2 rondas es cuando tenías que sacar el rastreador de acción y demás. Entonces, claro, se habrán dado cuenta de que está siendo más común de la cuenta el que los combates duren, y es una forma de decir, oye, vamos a darle al jugador la oportunidad de utilizar esto mucho más a menudo. Comprensible. De momento todos los cambios que estoy viendo para el jugador es comprensible.
Even though it's a slightly lesser number, which we think will be more fun and more balanced and kind of keeps that kind of 6-6-6 across the way for starting characters.
Yeah, and I think the armor system too, what's interesting to me about having more slots, having the numbers be slightly less, is that they allow you to push damage now below your minor threshold. And as the armor scores increase, as you level up, you'll have more chances to increase your armor scores. You'll have more chances to increase the number of armor slots you have. That'll allow you to continue to push damage down from severe to major, from major to minor, minor to nothing. But yeah, there's not the...
Eso es verdad, porque una de las cosas que pasó en la partida anterior que tuvimos, fue que les metí no me acuerdo quién fue, le metí una cantidad de daño muy grande y utilizó todas sus armaduras y seguía estando en el daño mayor. ¿Vale? Le entraba daño severo por encima del severo. No llegó a duplicarlo, pero le entraba daño por encima del severo. Y aun gastándose todos los huecos de armadura, se quedó en el rango mayor. ¿Vale? Y... Entonces, esto es guay, porque ahora lo que han hecho sí, te han bajado de 5 a 3, te han quitado 2 puntitos, pero no te han dado la posibilidad de utilizarlo 3 veces más, o 4 veces más, o 6 veces más, por lo que he visto. Entonces...
decision point anymore as far as like figuring out, oh, okay, if I have abilities that take stress, do I want to mark 3 armor slots and reduce it down to stress, or only 2 and reduce it down to hit points? There's a little bit of like a analysis paralysis we were seeing happen there.
I think it's one step a little too far.
Totally. So yeah, so that's kind of that system in overview. Do we want to talk about the fear economy?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, let's do that.
Vale, eso es con respecto a los jugadores, ¿vale? Que no me parece mal, lo dicho. Ahora vamos a ver cómo han gestionado la parte del miedo.
So the fear economy has changed because when you roll your hope and fear die, now when you roll with fear, the GM has the option of either making a move or of taking fear as a currency.
Yeah, previously you'd get both, essentially. You get fear every single time, regardless. Like, you get GM move and take a fear. Now it's a choice for the GM each time someone rolls with fear. And that is intentionally, one, to make sure that fear doesn't get generated so
Claro,
often.
para reducir el poder.
Always rolling, especially when you have many, many players at the table.
Es que era gracioso. Esto me vais a permitir que lo pare un segundito, ¿vale? Esto era gracioso porque a mí me pasó en la partida. ¿Dónde estás? Paint. Aquí. Me pasó en la partida que de... Voy a borrar esto, ¿vale? Bueno, en verdad yo creo que si hago así... ¿Voy a eliminar lo suficiente? No, vale. Me pasó en la partida que de los jugadores había veces que no hacían la tirada con miedo, que no hacían la tirada de acción con miedo. Entonces, no, mentira, al revés, que hacían muchas tiradas con miedo, ¿vale? Entonces yo al momento, pues, me encontré con que tenía en mi carterita de miedo, ¿vale? Tenía, pues, a lo mejor, me lo voy a inventar, 20 tokens, ¿vale? Y ellos tenían casi todos los puntos de vida marcados, tenían casi todos los estrés marcados, se habían quedado sin cartas de acción, estaban jodidos. Y yo me di cuenta de que todavía tenía 20 fichas de miedo para jugar. Y en el localizador de acción, que no lo usásemos, pero en el rastrador o localizador de acción, había, pero no sé cuántos tokens, ¿vale? Había un montón de tokens. Entonces yo me di cuenta de que tenía la posibilidad de utilizar todos estos tokens y utilizar todos estos miedos. Eso era igual a un TPK. Absoluto. Para el que no sepa qué significa TPK, es Total Party Kill, ¿vale? Que es que te cargas a todos los miembros de la partida en un plis. Entonces, claro, si tú ahora me dices que yo como Game Master tengo la opción de escoger entre hacer un movimiento o tomar un token de miedo, es una forma de regular la economía. Es guay.
Situations where the GM has more fear than they need to spend.
Right, they're generating like 4-1 or 5-1, and the intention behind fear as a currency originally in the design was to allow the GMs to feel like, oh, I have all this fear, I can make moves and pay with fear to make those moves feel like they are fair to the players. What we actually found in playtesting at such a wide scale was that it was making GMs feel like they were limited in what they could do, as opposed to sort of freeing them up and being able to do things by spending fear. So by reducing that fear economy and saving the fear now to be spent on adversaries that have these like big ultimate moves, right? It allows the GM to be a little more specific in saying like, hey, I'm spending this to add more action tokens to the tracker. I'm spending it to, activate this big super ultimate move that this adversary has. But you aren't piling up like a ton of fear. There's now a cap as well. You have a maximum of 6 you can hold as the GM. So we're hoping that...
vale. ¿Cómo? Repite. ¿Repite eso?
You can hold as the GM. So
hay un máximo.
There's now a cap as well. You have a maximum of 6
Hay un cap as well. There is a maximum of 6.
you can hold as the GM. So
You can
we're
hold
hoping
it.
that lessens
Vale,
the burden on
vale.
the GM a little bit. They can free up to like feel a little more narrative.
Antes,
and then
antes eran 10, creo. No, empezabas con 10. Empezabas con 10 y podías tener todo lo que quisieras, si no recuerdo mal. Pero bueno, si lo han limitado a 6, es que es comprensible. Es que ya solamente empezar con 10 es una puta locura.
take fear when the players make a move, they roll with fear, and the GM doesn't quite know what move they should make there, or they want to let play continue. They can just go, "I'm taking a fear. You guys keep
You
going."
guys continue, which is in its own right a scary, fun little bit of tension building.
Correcto.
But as
Que
part
por cierto me di cuenta de que esto que acaba de explicar, de que tienes la opción de coger un miedo o de coger una acción, ya lo utilizaron esta gente, el Matthew Mercer, ya lo utilizó en la partida de demo que hicieron con el grupo. Entonces me da a mí que esta 1.3 no es tan nueva como parece. O que era algo que estaban intentando probar ellos internamente y que al final, a raíz de los comentarios de la comunidad, han dicho, oye, vamos a darlo. O que le salió instintivamente, de forma intuitiva, porque es que es algo que quizás narrativamente es más lógico, ¿no? Yo, a lo mejor, si estoy limitado de recursos, pues esta vez no hago nada y haced vosotros cosas. Entonces... Pero no, todo lo que estoy escuchando de momento, ya lo vi que lo usaron en el one shot que ellos hicieron de testing.
of that change the fear economy, there's also, and the stress economy and other things, there's been a large adversary rebalance as well across the system.
Correcto.
Better organized for the documents that have gone
Y
out
menos
for you
mal.
all, but also the fear required in a lot of the adversary abilities has been heavily reduced. So it's like, usually, like you said, the big special moves, the like really scary occasional use things might cost a fear, but most other things don't require it. And are broken down into new types of movesets.
Yeah, so we have actions, reactions, and passives. So passives are things that just apply across the board or apply like, under certain circumstances, but they're always there. Actions are things that you actually have to spend an action token to do. So, that might be like, if you want to make an attack, you would spend an action token to do that with that adversary. And then lastly, you have reactions, which are things that don't cost an action token, but that are reactions to a thing that has happened, right? So like, I'm thinking...
Esto es una de las cosas que yo tuve problema el otro día. El tema de las reacciones y demás. Porque claro, acostumbrado a Dragones y Mazmorras, tú tienes una reacción por ronda, ¿vale? Entonces aquí hablaban constantemente de tiradas de reacción, y yo no veía en ninguna parte, ni de la hoja de personajes ni del documento, cuándo o cuántas veces podía utilizar esa esa tirada de reacción. ¿Qué pasa? Ayer, analizando la versión, lo poco que pude ver del manual de la 1.3, pues me di cuenta de que cuando yo, como Game Master, tengo que utilizar una reacción, es porque me lo dicen. Tiene que haber algo en las cartas de los jugadores que cuando ellos hacen algún tipo de ataque o lo que sea, a ellos les dice específicamente que me tienen que decir a mí, que me tienen que comunicar a mí que yo tengo que hacer una tirada de reacción. Al igual que yo vi varios monstruos que en su casilla de personajes, en su descripción, uno de sus movimientos era una acción aleatoria, me lo voy a inventar, expulsión de gas, ¿vale? Y decía, pide a tus jugadores que hagan una tirada de reacción. Entonces, asumo que como esta gente es tan narrativa, como están tan centrados en todo el tema de la narrativa y de que todo sea súper dinámico, súper fluido y demás, una de las cosas que me estoy dando cuenta es que tú puedes tener todas las reacciones que quieras. Porque como se ve en las películas, como se ve en las series y demás, los enemigos reaccionan y demás. Y esto es lo que ellos tienen muy metido en la cabeza. Entonces, no me desagrada.
Thinking of one in particular where when somebody makes an attack on you, if they fail the attack on the adversary just gets to bolt, right? So like there's these interesting sort of reaction moves that the adversaries have. Some of them now cost stress, and every adversary now has some sort of stress count to it. So some of them will cost stress, and that's kind of the currency that we're using to say like, hey, this is a more impactful move than something that you would just be able to make without a cost. But yeah, there's been a full rebalance there with better organization. The stat blocks are a little bit more like confined, I guess, that they're just smaller on the page.
Yeah, easier
Just-
to read as one
yeah.
solid piece. which
Yeah,
is fun.
totally.
Sí, eso es verdad.
To that point too, the balancing, there's also bringing stress more to the forefront as a usable tool towards encounter victory conditions, if
Yeah.
you will, both combat and or social based. With every enemy now having an amount of stress at its disposal, we mentioned earlier that when you max out on stress, you become vulnerable. The same goes for your opponent or anybody that you're in a contested situation with, which means you now have more applications for stress-based builds that stress out your opponent without actually doing physical damage, and getting to the point where they're vulnerable, whether that means it opens them up to the rest of your party's ability to deal damage, if it's more of like a full-on combat encounter, or if it's just a heavily steeped social encounter in which you're wandering through a party, or you're having to deal with some sort of a politically tense negotiation, or you've found yourself in the midst of a scenario where you're having to try and persuade somebody to aid you and no longer become your enemy. By using both social maneuvers or creative ways to deal stress to the opponent, you can eventually lead them to become vulnerable to that final attempt to persuade them or intimidate them or get them to engage on your side of things.
Eso es una mecánica súper... A ver, que recordemos que este juego no... Aunque me está gustando, lo estamos cubriendo y demás simplemente para ver cómo evoluciona y eso, no es una reinvención de la rueda. Coge muchas cosas, obviamente. Obviamente. Si tú quieres atraer a un gran público de personas, tú tienes que coger algo que ya está asentado, simplificarlo muchísimo más y hacer como cuando estabas en el instituto y te decían me dejas copiar los deberes y tú decías sí, pero que no se note. Pues esto es lo mismo. Los nombres de las clases, exactamente, prácticamente las mismas, menos el Seraph, que tiene un poquito de Apitican de More. El nombre de las razas, Ancestry, perdón. El nombre de los backgrounds, communities, ¿vale? Todo ese tipo de cosas no deja de ser una readaptación muy simplificada, que también vamos a hablar de cuánto lo han simplificado, que ya se ve que no es tan bueno que lo hayan simplificado tanto, de lo que ya existe de Dragones y Mazmorras. Es un juego más de alta fantasía, que se nutre de un juego ya establecido desde hace 50 años de alta fantasía. Pero es que eso no es malo. ¿Por qué? Ya, lo voy a decir mucho más en profundidad en otro vídeo, pero creo que de hecho de esto quería hablar el jueves. A ver si me podía traer a alguien. Porque esto va a servir de puente. Esto es una conversación que tuvimos en la sesión de la aventura rápida. Y este juego va a servir de puente a mucha gente. Primero a ellos. Porque recordemos que esta gente está utilizando ahora mismo las normas de Dragones y Mazmorras para su campaña, para sus streamings, ¿vale? Entonces, se entiende y se sobreentiende que cuando este juego esté formalizado, la campaña número 4 vaya a ser en el setting de DAGGERHEART. Eso yo creo... A ver, que a lo mejor me equivoco, pero yo creo que no hay duda alguna ahí. Después, evidentemente, es merchandising para ellos. Es un juego en el cual anunciado en televisión. ¿Vale? Evidentemente va a ser un puente para ello. También ¿para qué va a ser un puente? Pues precisamente para lo que la conversación en la que se centró el tema en el que se centró parte de la conversación que tuvimos el otro día, en el que gente que no ha jugado nunca a un RPG y no sabe lo que es un juego de mesa de rol, este juego es lo más accesible porque tiene una construcción de personajes muy sólida, muy, muy directa. Estás pronto tirando dados, la comunicación es constante, hay poco miedo a equivocarse, pero eso también tiene su contrapartida, que es tan caótico que precisamente después de la versión 1.2, en la versión 1.3, han limitado muchas cosas. Han puesto muchos límites porque no puede ser todo tan Scrum. Para el que sepa lo que significa Scrum, ¿vale? No puede ser todo tan Scrum. No puede ser todo tan viva la pepa, tan vamos al libre albedrío y... No, tiene que haber cierto control, ciertas normas. Simplificadas, sí, todo lo que tú quieras, pero cierto control. Y una de las cosas que yo me encontré como Game Master en la última partida es que Los jugadores tenían muchísima libertad para hacer muchas cosas, pero yo tenía que tener el control de muchísimas otras más cosas que no tengo contra Dragones y Mazmorras. Tengo que llevar un control de los tokens, de los tokens de miedo, de los tokens de acción. Tengo que llevar un control de qué es lo que está pasando en el turno de cada cual. Es mucho más trabajo y no estaba tan pendiente de narrar o de incluso llegar a imaginarme lo que estaba pasando, porque estaba pendiente a otras cosas que de normal no estoy pendiente. No sé si eso tiene sentido. ¿Vale? Entonces, para un jugador, este juego, adelante. Para un Game Master que no haya tocado un juego en su vida, de momento no lo es. A no ser que vaya con la aventura guiada, que entonces sí. Si vas a pelo, no. Porque son además, recuerdo que esto ya lo dije, son 377 paginotas las que te tienes que leer. Tela.
So now stress becomes an even more viable way to come to conclusions, or even reduce a foe on the battlefield to the point where you convince them to stop fighting, and you now have a conversation in parlay.
Yeah,
Porque esa otra, que es, perdón que de esto he empezado y perdón que lo corté. Los encuentros sociales es algo que ya se hacía en Dragones y Mazmorras. Tú ibas a una feria y estabas en una negociación tensa porque había que liberar no sé qué historia, y tú tenías la conversación que tú tenías como jugador con el NPC de turno era basada en dados. Oye, pues voy a decir esto. Es una mentira, ¿verdad? Sí, pues dame una tirada de engaño. Oye, que yo quiero hacer esto tal y cual. Vale, pues dame una tirada de Sleight of Hand, de eso, ¿vale? Entonces aquí lo que han hecho ha sido verbalizar lo que ya se hacía. Que no está mal, repito, pero que no deja de ser una, oye, cópialo, pero que no se parezca, ¿vale?
I'm really excited to see how that plays out. And there's some guidance in the new manuscript around how to use stress as a GM, as like basically a track that you are allowing the players to move down in order to accomplish something. But if that's something that you all enjoy, if we like that element of the like social encounters that use stress, would love to know so that we can lean into that a little more. The thing that we should say here too is like all of this is here for playtesting, right?
Yes.
Like all of these things are things that we're ideas that we have that we're throwing at the wall. We want to see what you all think, and so looking at them as like, hey, this is an opportunity to try that kind of mechanic.
Uy, perdón.
And see if it's something we enjoy or something that is more confusing or whatever the feedback there is. We'd love to know, because I think that's an aspect of the game that you and I are both really interested in, which is like how do we make social combat, social encounters feel as
Eso lo probaremos. Eso voy a intentar incitarlo el próximo día.
Something that's smooth and simple for people that love like outer combat, actual like physical combat, and get them excited about social encounters and the game factor of it, being able to play in as well, while not taking away from the in the moment role play factors of it. So we're like all things here, we're toying with it. We're trying new things out. The fun of doing this open beta with all of you is that we can throw things at the wall, and you can tell us that's great or that sucks, and we go thank you, and then we'll adjust as we need to.
Totally. The last thing I'll say on this kind of section is that we've rebalanced the weapons as well. There are a lot of weapons available across many different tiers, so we did our best to rebalance them based on the feedback that we got, but would love to have your hand in helping to balance some of those as well. If you see one particular weapon and a primary weapon and a secondary weapon that have some sort of interaction that maybe wasn't intended, maybe it's cool, maybe we leave it, but also if it feels like
Esto lo
broken, or if
probaremos.
it feels like it's
Underwhelming.
not doing what it's intended to do. Would love to know that, because there are so many of them, which is exciting, and I think it's really cool, but also takes lots of playtesting to get right. Do you want to jump to the action tracker and the ranges?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go and do that.
Cool. So
Vale, esto
one
ya no lo vi yo
big,
ayer.
piece of feedback that we heard around the 1.2 version was that there was an adaptation that had to happen to the action tracker, and so we've implemented some optional rules for players to help either guide them along to use the rules as written or to use in their game whole cloth if they'd like. And basically on the action tracker front, what that means is that if you're at a table that either wants a little more rigidness to your initiative, how would you say, like, describe
to where it's less free form for players who either don't feel as comfortable taking the initiative, if you will, in a combat scenario, or worried about fairness for certain tables of people staying in the spotlight too often, or just getting used to the idea of a more free form type of initiative system.
De lo que están hablando ahora básicamente es de que están haciendo iniciativa con pasos extra. Punto. Initiative with extra steps. Ya está, ¿vale? ¿Qué pasa? Es que si tú tienes tanta libertad, no hay control. Y que sí, que es un juego que se centra muchísimo en la narrativa, que es un juego que es mucho de dinamismo y vamos a hacer esto y bla, y ahora yo hago tal y yo hago cual, pero ay, me cachis que ya he perdido el turno y le toca al Game Master, pues yo hago esto, pom, venga, os vuelve a tocar a vosotros, chavales, ¿qué hacéis, papá? Vale, que está muy centrado en eso, sí, genial. Pero es que llega un punto en el que no hay control, no hay... Tío, y que digo lo mismo, que esto es un juego de rol, es un juego de mesa de rol. Énfasis en juego. Todos los juegos, para que sean divertidos, en mayor o menor medida, tienen que tener unas normas. Algo que los enmarque. Tú después modificarás esas normas a tu medida, tú después ajustarás. Vale. Pero primero, dame unos patrones que yo pueda seguir. No me des una espada y un escudo y enfréntate a un Souls. Cuando yo lo que necesito es, quizás, no yo, sino todo el mundo, para empezar, una serie de pantallas con una guía de siguiente, ¿vale? Esa es mi humilde opinión. Y se ve que la de mucha gente porque lo han incorporado.
There's now an optional system where each player gets 3 action tokens.
They put them on their character sheet, and then those are like your available action tokens, and then you spend those just like normal. So you could spend 1 or 2 or even all 3 at a time if you wanted to. But once they're gone, you can't do anything again until everybody has spent theirs.
Yeah, and once everyone's tokens are gone, then everyone goes ahead and replenishes. That way it adds a little bit of a limitation for worries of players taking the spotlight too.
Me gusta. Cada jugador tiene 3. Es que es lo que tiene. Cada jugador tiene 3 y se van gastando como hasta ahora. Cada uno lo gasta cuando le salga de los dedos. Pero cuando se acaban, cuando se le acaban a cada jugador, no puede volver a tener tokens hasta que el resto de jugadores no hayan gastado los suyos. Entonces se vuelven a tener esos 3 y la acción sigue. Vale. Me parece bien. Porque, y esto es algo que me pasó a mí, mis jugadores, dentro de los 3 que había, 2 de ellos utilizaron todas esas acciones porque tienen esa iniciativa, porque tienen más de las cabezas locas del otro día, pues es esa. Y después hubo otra, pues que estaba un poquito más cortada, o tenía miedo de no hacerlo bien, o cualquier cosa que fuera, ¿vale? Que no tenía esa chispa, esa iniciativa de voy a hacer cosas. Y se encontró con que por cada 4 acciones que hacían los otros, ella hacía una. Entonces, esto es una forma de llevar ese control. Cosa que me parece genial, para que todo el mundo participe. Que recordemos, es un juego. Tiene que participar todo el mundo para que todo el mundo se lo pase bien.
Much. And also giving permission for those who are a little more demure to be able to be like, all right, cool, I'm going to wait until everyone else is done and then I go ahead and use my tokens and it still feels balanced and fair. So either that's an optional system that you can continue to implement.
Creo que esto lo vamos a usar.
You feel that's comfortable and good for you, or eventually through practice you start feeling like you can get more comfortable with how the initial intention of it was. Either way is at your disposal, and you want to test it out and see if you like it.
Yeah, and I think also there's a question of like.
Pero creo que eso es una de esas cosas que iba a terminar siendo texto no escrito de la comunidad, norma no escrita, y se iba a terminar usando sí o sí.
Like tactics, which in storytelling, story forward games, narrative forward games, there are a number of systems that don't have initiative, and that can feel a little bit like too free, or a little bit too not free. Free's not the right word. It's like a little bit too open,
Chaos.
right, for some
Yeah, for
players.
something that feels
Es caos.
tactical, and part of it is the fun of the tactical game.
Yeah,
Claro.
if that's the part of the game that's fun for you, then adding that token limitation will also make it so it's not just like, well, why doesn't our biggest damage dealer just hit every single time?
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that has been a discussion between these more story forward games and the more tactical games for a long time, since they've sort of existed. These have been in conversation with each other, and so this is our attempt to like allow you to play the way that you want to play, with still the intention of like having a little bit more freedom in that in that initiative space, where it's like, okay, I still can do 1 or 2 or even 3 things if it makes sense in the fiction for me to do those.
Yeah, it's like finding that balance between the permission to be flexible with the story as it's needed, without feeling like rigidly locked into turn-by-turn initiative that I myself grow frustrated with other systems sometimes.
Yeah.
But also, that can be a scary jump into the full freeform that the original Daggerheart release and intended like design is. So this is a nice way to try out an option.
Vale.
Yeah, and so there's a sort of a full section in the new core manuscript that details this and gives you some guidance and talks about it. So if this is something that you feel like your table would want, I absolutely recommend going to that section and giving that a read. The other
Seguramente
thing
lo
that
usaremos.
is optional, we gave a little more structure to the range. I know that there was lots of feedback around like it feeling like it's a little too loose, or it feeling like it's too regimented, as far as like us giving.
Es que volvemos a lo mismo. Es demasiado libre, es demasiado abierto, interpretación. Es que la distancia de un lápiz, la distancia de una hoja de papel.
In feet, and giving it in like narrative terms, and all these different options. So we have an optional rule where if you're using an online tool that has grids, or you're just used to grids and you want to play in grids, you can implement the options that we've given here for what melee, very close, far, and very far mean on a grid like that.
It's like a translation from how the rules are, which are meant to be a little more interpretive, but to give an option in which they are specific to more tactical based and very like specific measurement based combat. If you're using like I said, grid based maps at home, or
Vale. Lo voy a poner porque me hace mucha gracia, ¿vale? Dice. ¿Qué acaba de pasar aquí? Vale. El rango, ¿se ve bien? Sí. El rango de melee, distancia de toque. Very close, muy cerca, de 5 a 10 pies. Que esto ya estaba, por cierto. When in danger, you can usually move into melee with anything that's very close as part of any other action you make. Anything in a battle map. Vale. De 2 a 3 pulgadas. Close, de 10 a 30, entre 5 y 6 pulgadas. De far, entre 30 y 100. Vale, pues obviamente que de esto de todas formas se puede hacer algún tipo de papelito, que ya lo haré.
just like really getting finicky with those distances and numbers. We have those now as a translation.
Yeah, because I think the approach of the original of 1.2 was to say like, hey, we're gonna throw a bunch of stuff on the table, and the length between this this character and this piece of scenery, it's not as important as what the fiction actually is in the heads of the players at the table, and ultimately at the GM's call to be like, hey, that's actually close, or that's actually far range, right? And the pencil or piece of paper, it was just an estimation of like how we could approximate a map.
Yeah.
But we saw the feedback around like, well, some people like having more
Control.
More defined terms on that. So we want to make sure we cater to that too.
Yeah.
Vale, esencialmente es eso, que volvemos a lo mismo. Mucha libertad. Puedes hacer lo que tú quieras, sí. Pero la libertad lo que lleva es un poquito el caos. Tú no puedes... Venga, yo creo que estoy lejos. Voy a pegarle un arcazo. No, disculpa, es que está tremendamente lejos. Ah, vale, es que yo me lo había imaginado de otra forma. Cada uno se lo imagina cada uno tiene una imaginación diferente y no todos están con la misma capacidad imaginativa y no todos están alineados en la mesa que están jugando en este teatro de la mente, aunque sea un teatro, por muy bien que tú como Game Master o ahora en este juego como resto de jugadores, por muy buenos que seáis definiendo, narrando, detallando, siempre va a haber esa falta de unión mental, es que no sé cómo definirlo, ¿vale? De que no todo el mundo va a estar sintonizado imaginándose exactamente lo mismo. Pasa con los libros. Cuando tú lees un libro y tú hablas con otra persona de este personaje tal cual, sí, porque yo lo veo también así, tal y cual. Y después cuando hay una representación visual, ya sea dibujo, ya sea película, ya sea serie, ya sea lo que sea, pues yo no me lo imaginaba así, pues yo sí, hostia, pues yo no, pues si me ha pasado a mí, en mi libro. Gente que yo cuando dibujé a Iridia o cuando dibujé a Feras me dijeron, para nada me lo imaginaba así. Otros me dijeron exactamente igual como me lo imaginaba. Si pasa con eso, ¿qué no va a pasar en un momento en el que estamos todos de cháchara y pasándolo bien y demás? Control. Que no hay nada malo en el control. Honestamente.
The big thing about DAGGERHEART is we want it to be able to help you play the game how best you want to play it and what makes you most excited to play it. So introducing these options hopefully allows you
Vale, chachi.
Yeah, one
Y que
last
cada
thing
uno
on the action
elija.
tracker as well is that we've implemented a new term which is like it's use in action on some of the domain cards, some of the abilities and things. Generally, in the previous version, you'd put an action token on the action tracker every time you rolled. You made an action roll, right? And now we've refined that into being it's when you use an action, which is something that tells you that you're using an action to do it, or you're making an action roll. So there's still things that don't require a roll, but still
like you're still applying a token onto the action tracker to use that ability. And there are still abilities that don't use an action, and those are like the quick ones that you can throw in.
Que eso también lo han
before you go
implementado,
ahead
porque
and
no
finish off
todas las
something.
habilidades hacían un gasto de acción.
Quick abilities with the big ones.
Vale.
Great. Should we talk about advantage and disadvantage?
Let's go for it.
Okay.
So yeah, we definitely had advantage disadvantage. Previously was 1d6 added to scenarios. We listened to
Or
a lot
subtracted
of
for
or
dis-
subtracted for disadvantage. Listening to a lot of your feedback, both on implementation and how we can fit that in a way that feels a little more
Que había problemas con la ventaja y desventaja.
in line with the rule system as we developed it. And so we've adjusted that now. So where advantage now means you roll an additional hope die and then choose whichever one of the two that you want. And disadvantage is you roll an additional hope die and take the lesser of the two. A little familiar to some other
Un poco familiar, ¿no, cabrón?
systems out there.
Yeah.
But also ends up making it a little more to your benefit when it's advantage, and a lot more to your disadvantage if it is disadvantage.
Yeah. Well,
A ver. No sé la matemática de esto, pero lo que estáis haciendo es la ventaja del dado de 20 con pasos extra. Volvemos a lo mismo. Estáis intentando redefinir. Lo que están pretendiendo es darle ese giro fresco, y entre comillas en el aire de con fresco, a una cosa que ya funcionaba de antes. Que el sistema que había antes no era feo. Los dos dados de 12, esperanza y miedo, más un dado de 6. Si es ventaja se suma, si es desventaja se resta. No sé por qué.
advantage, right, means that you're still rolling an additional hope die, but you're taking the lower one. So that means that you are less likely to roll with hope, and you're less likely to succeed on the check. With advantage, you are more likely to succeed on the check, and you're more likely to roll with hope or get a critical.
Correct.
Repite.
And
When it's advantage, and a lot more to your disadvantage if it is disadvantage.
yeah, well, disadvantage, right, means that you're still rolling an additional hope die, but you're taking the lower one. So that means that you are less likely to roll with hope, and you're less likely to succeed on the check.
Vale. Sí.
With advantage, you are more likely to succeed on the check, and you're more likely to roll with hope or get a critical.
Correct. If you can choose between two different numbers, sometimes the lesser number might be the better choice if it matches your fear die. So it does give you a better chance of pushing for a critical when you have advantage.
So that change we're hoping into.
Sí, pero eso también puede pasar cuando lo tiras con desventaja. Pero la única diferencia es que si lo tiras con ventaja, tú puedes elegir ese crítico. Vale.
Integrates into the system a little more. It also means that you aren't having to add or subtract numbers to your.
Creo que esto que acaba de decir es el problema. Creo que este es el problema.
Numbers to.
Coño.
So that change we're hoping integrates into the system a little more. It also means
Esto.
that you aren't having to add or subtract numbers.
No tienes que sumar o restar números. No sé yo si el problema es que está siendo que son como demasiadas cuentas que hay que hacer. Y si una de las cosas que quieren hacer es eliminar todo ese proceso de hacer cuentas que tiene dragones y mazmorras, esto es una forma de hacerlo.
To your dice total as much, you just look at which die you want to
Exacto, es simplemente por observación. Este es mayor que este, me quedo con este.
and then that
¿Sabes?
is the one that you use. So it isn't 3 things that you're adding together; it's only 2 things you're adding together.
Correct.
Which I think for speed at the table
Yeah,
is probably
streamlining.
helpful.
I think so.
Vale, por velocidad de mesa, sí. Por velocidad de la tirada. Vale, te lo compro.
On top of that, there have been some adjustments to some of the other mechanics that interact with that. So one of those things is helping. And now when you help an ally, you spend a hope and you roll a hope die.
Vale.
And then the person that you're helping can either use their hope die or your hope die as
Vale.
as their die. on
Básicamente
the roll, which is really fun.
han traspasado la mecánica de la ventaja, que también era como para ayudar a una persona, a un aliado, que se le daba un dado de 6, pues ahora han hecho lo mismo. Yo también tiro con un dado de 6 y el objetivo decide cuál de los dos dados se queda. De 12, perdón.
Which
Yeah.
is interesting because
Yeah.
there are certain abilities in the game that can augment your hope die.
Right.
So there might be
Yeah.
an opportunity where your hope die is a d20 because of an ability or spell that you have in this moment. And now you're helping them, giving them the opportunity to choose your hope die in that
Yeah.
instance. So it has some interesting synergies based on different builds that are at the table.
Totally. I think that the thing that's exciting for me about that is that it also feels one-to-one. Like it's like I spend a hope and I roll a hope, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like you're involved in the roll as well. And that's one of the things I really liked about helping from the last version of the system, which was like I spent the hope and I rolled a d6 and we got to choose which, we got to take that value because I'm the one who's rolling it.
Yeah.
This still sort of captures that same feeling of like I am helping you, so I'm rolling, but now you get to choose the better. So anyway, I'm excited to see how that plays out. And see how you like it.
Me too.
The last one's group action rolls.
Group action roll, which we've brought in a system where, and you've seen me do it on Critical Role many times probably, where everyone is trying
Muchas
to shape
veces.
something together.
De hecho, yo lo empecé a aplicar después de de ver cómo lo hacía él.
There was a group, we wanted to kind of build a space where that feels as easy to run, but still everyone can contribute to and make it feel like it isn't an amorphous part of the narrative.
Well, I was gonna say one of the things that I really wanted to capture with that group action roll is that it isn't just that all of the players are rolling necessarily the same action. I want it to be like a moment that is occurring and how everybody is helping to achieve a goal, right? So the way that the group action rolls currently work is that when you're gonna make that roll, you decide who's gonna be involved, and then you choose a leader, and that leader waits for a second while the other players who are all contributing to that roll make reaction rolls, depending on what they want to do. And reaction rolls, as a reminder, they don't generate hope or fear. They usually don't generate an action token, but in group rolls, there's a little bit of a difference there, and we'll talk about that. But basically, like I think this is the example in the book that we wrote, but like the party is trying to escape from a crumbling ancient fortress, and they're running down the halls, and they're all like, "We're trying to get out." And the GM then goes, "Okay, sounds like we're gonna make a group action roll here to try and do that." Hey, who is leading this roll? The ranger goes, "I know the way. I'm gonna lead the roll." The guardian goes, "Great. Well, I'm gonna try and shield everybody with like my, with my strength and like my size. I'm gonna try and shield the rest of the party from the falling debris." And so they would make the GM might determine that they make a strength reaction roll.
Por
And so
ejemplo,
they would do
vale.
that, and if they succeed on that roll, then
Yo hubiese dicho agilidad, pero vale.
they give the ranger who's going to make the like final roll, the leader roll, they give them +1. If they fail, they give them -1. And so we go around the table sort of resolving all of these moments with all the other players who are helping, and then the ranger would make a roll at the very end of that with all of the different modifiers that their party has given them. They roll and see if they succeed or fail, and that's kind of like...
Vale, pensaba que iban a hacerlo como él lo hace en Critical Role. Porque él lo que hace es... hace tirar a todo el grupo y por cada fallo aumenta la dificultad de clase y por cada éxito disminuye la dificultad de clase. Así es como yo lo hago. Así es como yo lo hacía porque se lo copié a él. Entonces esperaba que hicieran lo mismo aquí, pero no. Es que básicamente lo que están haciendo es... le están dando una bonificación al líder. Pero la dificultad de clase se queda igual. Vale, tiene sentido. Tiene sentido.
The big result of all
Otra
of
forma de
those
hacerlo.
individual rolls that happened before, and then the leader also puts a number of action tokens on the tracker equal to the number of party members that were involved if the tracker is active at the time.
It's a really, really cool system to kind of tackle those moments in the game where they're all contributing to a specific thing, especially in the heat of a moment or of a specific goal that I love so much. So I'm excited to throw this into testing and see what you guys think about it. See how you like it, what things we can tweak about it, if you think there's any out there. I'm really happy to have this.
Yeah, I know it's something that we were working towards, and it wasn't in 1.2 because we wanted to make sure that we were doing it right.
Yeah.
Before we just like release.
Yeah, we had a number of ideas on how to go about it, and we wanted to make sure we got to something that was worthy of going out into actual playtest.
Yeah.
And we got something we can go through.
Yeah, and also just a differentiation for those who are wondering, the help action is when a player goes, hey, I want to help out. The group action role is generally called by the GM. They're the one who activates that, and that was one of the other pieces that we wanted to make sure was clear in the book. So hopefully go read that, see if that's clear, that like the GM is the one who calls that role, and the player.
El aliado ayuda porque él quiere y el de grupo es porque el Game Master lo llama.
Still operating basically the same.
Easy.
The one point of note that I have on there is that there was question around how many action tokens a tag team role takes. And after all of the playtesting, what we determined is that because you're only choosing one action role to use, it's only one action token. So that's kind of where we landed on that front.
Los tag team es cuando dos jugadores deciden hacer un movimiento conjunto y esencialmente lo que hace es uno es el que hace la llamada de la acción, por lo tanto tiene que tener 3 esperanzas disponibles y el otro pues simplemente tira normal y se añade los resultados, bla bla bla, la historia. Entonces lo que hacían era que añadían 2 tokens de acción al rastreador de acción. Ahora solamente es uno porque tiene sentido de que solamente es un movimiento. Se agrupa. Así que, chachi.
I love tag team roles too. I think the last thing of the big 6 that we have, which are like the 6 big changes we want to go over, are environments. And this is something new that we are experimenting with. It is definitely the most experimental of the things that we're putting out, I think, as far as systems are concerned. Environments are essentially adversaries, but they're statted like adversaries or similar to adversaries, but they represent the environment that you're in. And the most obvious, I think, way to think about these is like, okay, if I'm making an encounter that happens in an environment where like there's a section of the battle map that I know is gonna be just muddy, like just thick in mud.
Sigue hablando.
Then I might say any moves. I might make like an environment move, a passive, that says like any agility rolls to traverse this area, the like mud area, is at a -2, right? Or
vale.
or is at disadvantage, or whatever it is that you want.
Eso se llama terreno difícil con pasos extra. A ver, que lo digo, que no está mal. Cada vez que digo que están haciendo una cosa que hace Dragones y Mazmorras, pero dándole pasos extra, no estoy diciendo que esté mal, por defecto, ¿vale? Lo único que, evidentemente, es puro marketing. A ver, que se entiende, que yo lo entiendo todo. Me refiero a que se entiende que tienen que vender su juego, que estamos trabajando en esto, es súper chachi, probadlo, es dinámico, tal y lo es, Pero que esto no deja de ser un terreno dificultoso o terreno difícil con frases diferentes, con definición diferente. Pero es que además también es una cosa que a mí me va a quitar de trabajo como Game Master. Porque si yo un día me descarrila la partida, que es raro, ¿verdad? Que mi grupo me descarrile la partida, y de repente se tienen que adentrar en un sitio en el cual no tengo el entorno preparado, pues me iría a estos entornos que ya me tienen pregenerados y diría, pues voy a utilizar estas mecánicas. ¿Por qué? Porque si tiene trampas, si tiene terreno dificultoso, si tiene montañas, si tiene emboscadas, si tiene lo que sea, me lo va a decir. Lo único que no sé, que no me fijé, es si tiene algún tipo de acción de entorno, que sería lo que en Dragones y Mazmorras sería las acciones de guarida, ¿no? Creo que recuerda que se llamaban Lair Actions. Que es cuando tú tienes un enemigo que estáis como party atacando a un enemigo que está dentro de su entorno en el que vive, él tiene la posibilidad de hacer Lair Actions, acciones de guarida. Si esto también lo tiene, ya es definitivamente una guarida con extra steps. Easy. Pero oye, repito, que no está mal, pero oye, también hay que decir cuándo no hay que venirse tan arriba, ¿vale? Las cosas como son.
Want to do, but you can essentially like set up as a GM, set up some actions and reactions and passives for yourself in a place where a battle or even just like a conversation might be happening. You might have one that's like a marketplace, and you set up certain abilities you can call on. And for GMs that are used to playing in this kind of space, you might not need to use this, but
Exacto.
for a little more like support in those regions, I think the environment tool is a cool way to like lean
No deja de ser una herramienta.
into actionable things that you know you're going to use in play.
It's a cool resource for newer GMs that kind of
Correcto.
want a little more guidance on how they can set scenes or environments
Correcto.
or encounters, social or
O cuando yo me quedo sin ellas.
just to also help kind of fill out the visual narrative of what exists there. You know, you might find they'll have like preset ones in there that you can look at, like, what's a swamp like? I'm about to throw them in a swamp. I'm improvising a swamp. Oh crap! Look for a swamp environment. There's a swamp environment. Okay.
Correcto.
Heavy mists, the sound of insects. You know, all these different things that both are descriptors, but also might have mechanical, impact on the things that are happening around here. And so it's a great place of inspiration. It's a great place to guide your idea in the narrative, but also to include some additional challenges and layers based on where they are and what might be happening in those spaces.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how. Again, we're very early days on this, right? So, like, I'm excited to see how environments can scale down or scale up depending on what your need for them is. So, like, if you have an environment that is one specific like dance hall, right? Or like a what is that called? Like not a banquet, like a banquet hall, or like some place where you're like liaisoning with people and like, you know, having these social encounters. Like, that is just one room, and that environment could cover that room. You could also make an environment for an entire mountain.
Yeah.
Right? Like this whole mountain has these things that are attached to it.
Yeah,
and
the
like
sprawling desert has these various factors to it.
and so that could be a traversal exploration kind of piece that functions similarly to an adversary too in some fun ways. So anyway, the early days on this, and it's something that I think we're really looking forward to seeing your feedback on. The one thing that I am looking for specifically with that is like, does this help GMs to feel like they have more tools at their disposal, more...
Yo lo voy a usar. Porque, uy, perdón, que vaya pico he tenido ahí. Yo lo voy a usar esencialmente porque tengo que definir la partida. Que por cierto lo voy a hacer mañana. O ahora. Vamos a hacerlo ahora, sí. Hoy va a ser día full DAGGERHEART. Hoy vamos a preparar la partida. Y yo lo voy a utilizar. Esencialmente porque quiero utilizar las herramientas que están haciendo, pero también porque a lo mejor me aporta cosas que yo estoy haciendo mal o no estoy haciendo del todo bien, o tío, es aprender.
Opportunity to like spend their fear on big moves that are in the environment, or like have certain they can spend their action token on the GM move to like activate a thing in the environment. Is that fun, or is it too much like load? Like, does that increase the load or does it decrease the load? I'm interested to see how generally the public feels about that, because for me it's fun and I use it when I need it, but don't use it when I don't.
Yeah, I think it's a fun resource.
Yeah.
Like some of the optional rules that are presented
Mientras
here,
esté ahí
it's not
disponible.
prescriptive or necessary for gameplay, but I think it's
Si
a
no
fun
les
tool
pesa
for
a
people
ellos.
that are excited to engage with it, and a fun point of inspiration for even just those who want to read it and take what pieces of it they want. Which is
Right.
my favorite part of role-playing games are looking at like, that's cool, I don't need all of this, but I can take this piece. Whereas
Exacto.
other players love
Exacto.
kind of digging into the full breadth there. Like I love the idea of like
Seleccionar lo que yo necesito.
and one of the environment elements could be like nosy patrons.
Yeah,
where it's like
totally.
anyone attempting to make a
So
a
good,
roll with presence in the space does so with a disadvantage if they're talking about anything that's important, or like just things that can adjust all different kinds of rules based on the environment they're in, not just like changing your movement or combat. It can cover a whole swath of things. But anyway, yeah, excited to see what you think about it, how useful it may or may not be, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Talk about the sort of more nitty gritty, lesser six, like sort of a bigger overview, less specifics about the
Agreed.
game. The first one that we have is like, there was an entire overhaul of the rulebook structure, and
Eso sí me
I think
gustó.
that will help players and GMs to navigate the book a little bit easier. Most of that structure rework was done in the GM section, so
Sí.
hopefully that's a little bit easier to parse for people. There are more tables. There's more sort of a pathway down the GM section now. So we look forward to seeing what you think. If it feels like it's easier to engage with it, now
Lo
that
es.
it has a little bit more structure to it.
Te digo ya que lo es.
One of the other bits that we did, and you'll see this in the beginning of the book, is we added a section that's rulings over rules. This is a very common thing in like OSR communities and OSR style games. And story games also, story fiction forward games also often have
Vale.
either an implicit or like explicit version of this in the rules.
Yeah.
Vale,
But it's
sí.
essentially
Ya-
saying
vale.
like, as the table and as the GM in specific,
Correcto.
we make rulings over following the letter of the rule. So
Correcto.
if something doesn't make sense with the fiction, and I use the example of like there's like a grappler that is a weapon, right? And it's a secondary weapon, that you can take as your starting piece of equipment. And if you want to use the grappler and it allows you to, for those who haven't seen it, it allows you to like pull the target into melee with you, right? If that target is a castle, you're not going to pull the castle into melee with you, right? Like the ruling on that is like, you might be able to pull some bricks from the castle into melee with you, but you can't target the entire castle and then pull the
Obvio.
castle into melee
Or
with you.
conversely,
Sería raro.
like maybe that pulls you into melee with the guy.
Que igual.
Whatever the ruling there is that follows the fiction, that's sort of the importance.
Exacto.
That's the
Adaptarte,
hero,
simplemente.
right? This is stuff that we do in games all the time.
Sí.
right?
It's not explicitly laid out often in some books, many of ours, but want to make sure that it's also outlined in ours for those who are looking for it.
Yeah. One of the other bits is like almost all class features have been changed or modified in some way. Not all of them have been wholly changed. Like the warrior was changed pretty significantly. I think two or maybe even all three of the abilities it had were
Vale.
touched, were shifted.
The bard's ability was
The bard's
adjusted
ability
pretty
was
Cambios para el
adjusted,
Game
yeah,
Master,
the
cambios
bard no
para
longer has
las
a
clases,
cooldown
se esperaba.
that they use to be able to like trigger the effect. The purpose of that kind of thing, and something overall you'll see in the adversaries and across a lot of the moves that we've adjusted in 1.3, is we tried to reduce the bookkeeping. So like with the bard in particular, they had to watch every roll and tick up their die every time a roll with fear was made, which while thematic and cool, I think also requires a level of bookkeeping that can be a little bit finicky, where now it's just when you enter battle, you
Yeah.
get to give everybody a D6 rally die. So that hopefully helps to keep the bookkeeping, the level of like how much I have to be looking down at my sheet, limited in
Yes.
this way.
big goal this week.
Yeah, a lot of it is streamlining, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what playtesting does.
Exactly.
So yeah, the class features have been shifted. Almost all ancestry community and subclass features have also been.
Estamos mirando el directo de ayer, que no lo pude ver en directo, de la explicación de estas dos personitas, que son los diseñadores jefes de DAGGERHEART, y estamos viendo qué es lo que ha cambiado. Ha habido cositas. Algunas me parecen un poco extrañas, otras me parecen un poco chachi, bastante chachi, la verdad. Pero de momento lo que están haciendo es simplemente leer y profundizar mínimamente en todos los cambios que vimos ayer que hubo en el changelog y en el manual de la versión 1.3, que por cierto, hola capitán. Saludos, capitán.
And adjusted in some way. Some of them more than others. Some of them are just like slight word tweaks, but there's others, others like the Fungirl that have had overhauls based on the feedback of the mechanics that we got.
Vale.
The Fungirl now
Las
allows
clases,
you to,
ya digo, no puedo hablar mucho de las
when
clases porque
what is it when something
las que he tocado,
When a creature,
las que he tocado por parte de mis jugadores estaban bien. A mí me parecieron equilibradas. Lo único, muy débiles. Eso sí, lo han arreglado. Han aumentado no el poder, han aumentado la resistencia de los jugadores y han disminuido las defensas de los enemigos, pero no han aumentado el poder. No han aumentado el poder de los jugadores ni han disminuido el poder de los enemigos. Es un poco raro.
or a friend,
Yeah.
marks his last hit point and dies, it can basically like
absorb their
take a little
last.
bit of the last bit of their life to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like
a cool
fungus
little
that feasts on dead things.
yeah, like their whole thing is that they eat dead things. So we tried to lean into that a little bit. So we're playtesting it and would love feedback. One of the other things that I wanted to note as well is like there are going to be changes here that are whole cloth different than 1.2, and in those cases, I would love to hear if and when you play those things, if you like the new changes better than the old changes, or if you like the old, specifically if you like the old version better than the new version. Those are all things that are super valuable for us to know, because obviously we're getting feedback and we're making changes based on like what people are saying.
Es que yo el cambio que han hecho de marcar el último punto de estrés no lo veo. Ahora mismo sobre el papel no lo veo. Quizás jugando sí que les será más sencillo sobrevivir, pero ahora mismo
Maybe those changes, a lot of times in game design, the changes that are asked for can actually be a problem that stems further up the line.
Right.
And so you're adjusting the like effect when you should be adjusting the cause, and it's hard to know. I mean, we do our best to sort of interpret what the feedback is.
We're this close to the rules for a long time. You're the importance
Exacto.
for these playtests to be able to have you all from a further
Es
distance
una
try
beta.
and remind us.
El que nunca haya
Yeah.
trabajado en formato beta,
And also, I think the feedback that we get,
le envidio.
if the feedback is still like, this isn't working, and it's not solving the problem that I had originally, or it's creating this other problem, like that might just be something that we can look at a higher level now and be like, okay, what's the approach here we need to take with this?
Yes.
So anyway, something to note that like if you're seeing things that feel like they are changed but not fixed, it would be very valuable for us to have that feedback.
Made some small changes to numerous domain cards. Once again, some small, some larger, and those are outlined as easy to download. Specifically, like I said earlier, if you've already printed out the cards, to just change the ones that are there.
And I was gonna say there's some that have been like fully replaced. Like there's a couple cards that are just like gone, been fully replaced, and then some that just have little tweaks. So would love your eyes in going through and seeing if you feel like we solved some of the issues that you all were facing. I'm hoping that use in action helps to clarify a lot of the issues that were being had in domain cards, which is like, does this contribute to the action tracker or not, right?
Yeah. So,
Vale, sí.
hopefully that
Eso
will
sí
help
tengo yo ganas de
clarify a
verlo,
lot of that for all.
honestamente.
Also, how gold and
Yeah.
the monetary system is implemented. A lot of great feedback on
Lo de que hayan cambiado el oro
a number of ways. One,
me resulta gracioso.
baseline type of monetary unit is a gold piece. So you can use
Ajá,
gold pieces
ajá.
for class, toss someone.
Vale, para contexto. En la versión 1.2 el sistema monetario se manejaba, al igual que el resto del juego, de forma un poco loca, sin control, sin sentido y siendo un poquito Scrum, ¿vale? Para el que, repito, ya es la segunda vez que utilizo la referencia Scrum. Para el que sepa lo que estoy hablando de Scrum, creo que se puede entender lo que es el concepto Scrum y lo caótico que se puede volver en algunas ocasiones, ¿vale? Dicho eso. Fuck. Espérate, porque no se me acaba de ahí.
Unit.
Ah, las monedas, vale. Hasta ahora lo que se estaba manejando era puñados, bolsas, cofres, montones y fortunas, ¿vale? Entonces, claro, cuando decía, bueno, vi cuánto cuesta una poción de salud, pues no sé, dame 2 monedas. Y claro, eso donde lo marcabas. Como decías tú, ¿en qué momento me quedo? ¿En qué momento el yo haber gastado X número de monedas me hace pasarme de una bolsa a un puñado? ¿Sabes? Ese tipo de cosas. Quedaba un poco en el aire. Entonces, claro, ahora pues lo que han hecho que es, pues la unidad básica son las monedas. 10 monedas es una bolsa, 10 bolsas es un cofre, y así, ¿vale? Entonces, no se veía venir, ¿verdad? Que pusieran control en algo que estaba descontrolado.
Is a gold piece.
Al menos han mantenido el puñado.
New singular pieces, which are class, toss someone a gold piece or throw someone a coin there. So it starts there, and they go in increments of 10. Previously, we had them in a little more of like a theoretical size sense, but
Pero sigue siendo una medida de
since we're all
control.
used to metrics based.
Es que es eso, es que estamos acostumbrados, tío.
So like you get 9 gold pieces. And
Somos personas que estamos cortados por la necesidad de control.
A bag.
Bag, and then you get 9 bags. That goes up into a chest.
Yeah.
Once you get to the 10th one, and so that all transitions upward.
Porque además, una cosa que yo siempre he pensado, el tema de las fortunas, que estaba en la hoja, ¿vale? Las montañas y las fortunas. Tío, podías llegar a tener hasta 6 fortunas. Vale, imaginemos que no llegas a 6, pero tienes, no, perdón, 2 fortunas o una fortuna. ¿A dónde coño vas tú con una fortuna? Si ya de por sí manejar 5 o 6 cofres ya es una puñetera locura. Narrativamente hablando, tanto que se centran en la narrativa, tanto que se centran en la ficción, en lo que es fluido por la ficción y demás. Tío, narrativamente hablando, imagínate que tienes una party en la que cada uno, una party de 5, en la que cada uno tiene 5 cofres. Estás manejando 25 cofres. ¿Dónde coño metes tú 25 cofres de monedas? ¿Me explico? Entonces, ¿cómo, nene? ¿Vale? Ahora tienes una fortuna, ¿vale? Pero ya sabes que la fortuna la tienes que tener en un sitio al que vas a ir. El cofre, ¿vale? Te permito que te lleves un cofre. Ese tipo de cosas, ¿vale? No. Pero, tío, ¿dónde vas a nota con 25? A no ser que estipules con ellos, pues. Pero claro, es que si vas acumulando dinero y estáis en el quinto coño de donde habéis empezado, ¿cómo mandas dinero a tu base, ¿no? Ese tipo de cosas yo nunca. No le encontré sentido cuando lo leí. Y ahora lo han cambiado y han limitado la cantidad de dinero que puedes tener. Con razón.
Fortune, I don't think we really need fortune on player sheets because
Well,
it's kind of
we're-
hard
yeah.
to carry that around. You can have them in the-
Es que eso, ¿dónde vas con una
but,
fortuna?
I don't think too many of you are carrying a fortune on your back.
That was kind of the
Eh,
feedback that we also were trying to capture. Was
Exacto.
like, you wouldn't be carrying 10 chests. on your
Exacto.
person at all times,
No
right?
puedes
And
cargarlos.
so the guidance now on the chest section is like you can carry a chest, and then if you should ever have to take a second chest, you got to put the first chest somewhere.
En algún
right?
sitio, claro.
Like, you got to just take it and put it somewhere, or
Pero a ver, que eso también digo una cosa. Que lo hayan tenido que especificar. Es un poco de lógica, ¿no? Al que esté acostumbrado, si utiliza un poquito la masa gris, dice, ¿a dónde voy yo con 5 cofres, nene? Tendré que dejarlos en algún sitio. ¿Vale? Pero, claro, recordemos que somos una raza que necesitamos la advertencia de no te comas el detergente. Entonces, tiene sentido.
or the other gold that you have, you got to take that and put it somewhere. But like, you can't carry all of it with you.
Yeah, you can have as many chests as you
right.
manage to gain in your adventure,
Right.
but you got to store it somewhere.
Right. You can just bring it along and fight with a chest in your hand. So, yeah, that was kind of the reapproach there. Also, the Ranger companion sheet has been reworked. You'll see the changes that we made there, but we're hoping that helps to smooth out some of the issues people were having. There were, a number of other changes that came down the line too, some of which we addressed, and some of which we haven't addressed yet. And so I want to make clear, like, the changes that have happened here are the ones that we sort of set as priority to hit in 1.4. But just because the thing wasn't changed this time doesn't mean it won't be changed next time. And just because something
Vale.
has, just because we
Sí, que
set
siempre-
it some
que
way now doesn't mean it won't
todo es
be
factible a cambio ahora
than it
mismo.
was. Some of this is just A/B testing. Some of this is like, throwing things at the wall to see what people
Vale.
like better, what they don't.
Pero en algún momento tendrán que
that
empezar a
feedback is
decidir
all super important
cosas.
because if you had a thing that seemed like it was broken and it wasn't fixed in this update, keep telling us that it's broken because we are going to continue to iterate. And
Pues os lo
having
voy a decir
more
con
data
los
points
enemigos.
on that
Lo
feedback
siento.
will help us to identify areas of the game that still need to be fixed.
Vale,
Super helpful.
Chachi.
I think that we have maybe some questions that we should answer.
Yeah,
Is that what
yeah. I
we
mean,
should do? Okay.
that's kind of the major overviews of like the heavy beats. There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Ah, no ha dicho nada de la aventura. ¿No van a modificar la aventura?
smaller fiddly things that we have in
Yeah.
the release, the patch notes, if you will, for 1.3.
Ah, no, vale, la aventura dijeron que la iban a modificar después.
That's kind of
Vale.
the general overview of the biggest changes.
Vale.
So we have some questions we got here from the Twitch and the YouTube chats here, starting with advantage disadvantage is now an extra roll, but why only hope? Does this mean crits will happen a lot more? The disadvantage is there a rule to avoid crits?
It's such a good question. So, the math actually works out to have hope roll as both the advantage and disadvantage. The reason being because when you roll hope and you take the lower, when you roll 2 hope die and you take the lower, and you also are rolling a fear die, there's a better chance that you are rolling low with the hope, which means you're not succeeding and you're not getting. If you rolled an extra fear die, for example, right? Like, if you took the higher fear die, you would still have a better chance of passing the check. But you'd have a better chance of it also being with fear. But it would feel a little bit disjointed if you rolled with 2 fear and you took the lower fear. You'd have a better chance of rolling with hope as the result. Which all of
Mucha
that comes together
matemática.
to mean we're rolling 2 hope die.
Soy de
and we're
letras.
taking whichever one we want with advantage, and we're taking the lowest one with disadvantage. That still gives you the same percentage chance of critting. The crit chance does not change.
Os
because
tendré
you're
que creer.
taking,
Vamos a darle un poquito de velocidad,
one
¿no? Porque
die
estas ya son
value, which is your
preguntas.
fear die, and then your hope die, and then you're seeing if that fear die matches it. So it's a 1 in 12 chance. It's the same percentage. But if you have advantage, then you actually have a higher percentage of getting a crit because you can choose between the 2 dice.
Right. So advantage does become a little bit cooler in this.
Yeah.
However, disadvantage doesn't increase your chances of getting a crit because even let's say your fear die was matching your hope die and you have disadvantage. You have to take the lower of the
Claro,
other
claro.
of your fear die, or take the lower of your
Sí,
hope die and have a
básicamente porque eso es lo que llevo pensando todo el rato. Si tú tiras con desventaja, al obligarte a coger el número menor, si tú, por ejemplo, tienes un 8-8 y tu esperanza es un 6, pues te va a obligar a coger el 6 y te quedas sin el crítico.
pretty much the same chance getting a crit with that as you would.
Okay, do the updates make combat more dangerous for PCs? So things have been balanced to hopefully help it to stay about the same.
¿Más?
This is something that will need PCs.
Have pretty much the same chance getting a crit with that as you would otherwise.
Yeah. Okay, do the updates make combat more dangerous for PCs? So things have been balanced to hopefully help it to stay about the same level of danger. This is something that we'll need to see many, many combats to be able to know exactly what that balance is. I think in a perfect world for us, combat is dangerous, but not always like entirely super deadly at first hit, right? Like
eso-
it should feel a little bit treacherous the whole way through because that's
Eso
what combat
porque
is.
ahora mismo lo
In
es.
DAGGERHEART also, you don't have to die if you make a death move. You can always make the choice to drop unconscious. I think on the whole, we're hoping, and balance-wise, the numbers are telling us that it should be about the same, but that's feedback we'd love to get from you.
Yeah, try it out. Let us know. We've intended to balance it, but once again, only the playtest will tell.
Vale.
You want to take that
Yeah,
one?
next one is, can you provide more clarity on the action tracker and how that can be incorporated to include NPCs and allies? Does it take a GM move to activate them too?
This is something we were actually just talking about yesterday. So GMPCs and like allies is not something that in the rulebook currently it says this section is coming. It's
It
not
is.
something that it is. It's something we're working through, and there's a number of ideas that we were even talking about I think yesterday about how to make that happen. And so we're clarifying a little bit about what our design intention is there, how exactly that would interact with the action tracker, et cetera, et cetera. So not in this version, but coming.
Soon. We're working on it. Yeah.
Ajá.
So yeah, in process.
In process.
Indeed. So from here from Twitch, my players felt like they were incentivized to let the strongest among them take all the combat moves to prevent giving bosses extra actions. How do you recommend dealing with that at the table? Well, for one instance, the optional system they presented where everyone gets a limited number of tokens is one way in which every player is limited to the number of actions they can take until everyone else has taken those actions, and then the whole thing sets up again at 3 tokens. Or talk amongst your players. Is that fun? Is another conversation as well. I mean, being incentivized, I guess it depends on if you're taking this from the concept of a game that is meant to be won in a competitive level versus what is everyone able to contribute to that point. So, yeah, I mean,
Sí.
I would say the other thing too to think about, and
Sí, siempre lo puedes preguntar. Pero. Sí, no, pero, a ver. Tiene toda la razón. Porque si hay alguien que no quiere hacerlo, pues evidentemente no se hace. En el momento que haya una voz discordante, sobre todo en el ámbito negativo, pues no se hace y se toma la opción B. Que siempre hay una opción. Siempre, si tú hablas con los jugadores, tío, siempre puedes tener una opción.
this is kind of that spot we were talking about, where like narrative focused games and tactics, war game inspired games kind of hit together, and we're trying to make DAGGERHEART sit in a nice space in the middle and provide tools for you to be able to, play a narrative focused game.
Simplificándolo, claro.
So in that, this is sort of the territory that we run into, right? It's like there's on both sides of that coming in, and one of the notes I'll provide around that hopefully will help is, because of the nature of the game, because it's a narrative forward game, the players don't know that an action tracker exists. The players do, sorry, the characters.
No, eso.
And so when we approach those characters as what would they do in the fiction, knowing what capabilities they have as characters, what choices would they make in the story? When you see the GM and the players as collaborators in weaving a narrative, I think that helps to not think about combat as like, what is the most tactically sound, efficient move that I can make, but like, what do I want to see happen in the story here? For some players, that just won't work. If you're coming from a very like tactical, crunchy kind of place where combat is about the
problem-solving facet of the
like the meta problem-solving that you have, then would highly recommend using the optional kind of game, optional action token.
Esto va a ser algo.
But yeah, thinking about the game as a narrative and thinking about the approach as like, how are we telling the story here? What would my character be doing if they didn't have the meta knowledge of an action tracker existing? We can think of the action tracker as being a guide for us as a table to understand how time is sort of moving in our game, right? Like, you are all taking actions and the scene currently is on all of you, but when it shifts over to being on the GM, they also get to catch up their adversaries with where you are in the narrative in some ways. And so yeah, a bunch of different tactics you could take there with your table, but I think the easiest and the
Esto
most
es
direct
a
is
gusto
just
del
to implement the
consumidor
action token optional
y...
rule on your sheet and
Pero bueno,
see if you can
si lo
implement
pone,
it
es una
if
opción
that's
más.
something that you want.
Nada más.
Also, find fun ways to create combat encounters where doing the most damage isn't always how you win. That's how I like to do sometimes. But no, that's
No, pero,
super good.
pero mis jugadores siempre van a hacer pupa, ¿no?
And we're all, like I said, keeping an eye on all these things, and I appreciate you guys letting us know these sort of challenges that come up with your groups, because it helps us look at things and how best we can serve all these different playstyles in the system. So yeah, try out the new action tracker optional system that we were mentioning earlier and see how that works for you, and give us feedback on that, and we'll continue to tweak it.
Yeah.
Se
so
probará,
asking,
se
does the
probará.
Ranger animal companion action cost a player's action token? So because you are commanding them to act, you would put a token on the action tracker when you command them to like do a thing. The difference is that in the animal companion section on the sheet, right, when you're looking at it, there's a note that I believe what we landed on is, if you roll a success with hope, then you can immediately take an action and not have to spend an action token. So it incentivizes you to be like, okay, I'm having them do this thing, and then I'm following in their wake. So a little bit of tweaking there to kind of give you an advantage to using your companion.
Yeah, there's a fair chance that you'll have the opportunity to do an action plus with the companion, or the companion just does something cool. If that's what
Lo de los
Also,
companions,
the companion, per the new rules,
me
like,
gustaría
makes it
verlo.
outside unless you command it otherwise. So you aren't having to spend tokens to like move it with you.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a big thing of like, wait, does it just stay back there while I move off and like go make an attack? It stays with you unless you command it to do otherwise. In case it has to, you have to use an action token to do that commanding.
Civil environments also include traps, martial ones as well as social.
Yeah. That's the intention.
pero volvemos a lo mismo. Los entornos es algo que puedes utilizar o no, tío, es una herramienta más. Y si a ti te ayuda como Game Master a quitarte trabajo, adelante, hazlo, básicamente.
A certain role, they have to make a reaction roll or fall into crumbled ground, and be unable to move for a bit. Like we're playing with those sort of like set traps in the environment that can cause an additional layer. Possibly everyone around is listening in, so you have to be careful what you say because it might adjust how people interact with you. Or
Es ayuda.
positive things.
Es ayuda.
That could be a thing you set in the environment, which
Voy a darle un
causes
poquito para adelante, ¿vale? Porque estas ya son las preguntas de
get things hidden
de
like those are all things that we're playing
los que
with
estaban
in
viendo en directo.
things that can augment travel adventure for your
Yeah, I was
players.
even thinking like there's, if we're talking about that traversal of like a bridge that's collapsing or whatever,
Sí,
vale.
vale.
Yeah.
Right, and so now you're left with like this chasm, and 3 of your party members are still back across the way, and now you have to figure out how to deal with that. So there's cool little bits there that you can play with that feel like they create the opportunity for conflict beyond just how hard can you hit a guy,
Yeah,
right?
and
Like,
it's fun for inspiration when you're creating your own environments, but also, like I mentioned, they're going and consider the
updated quick start.
ways that you can
A ver,
adjust the
otra
challenge
pregunta.
and make
¿Qué
it
dice?
the environment.
Okay, we'll be getting an updated quick start adventure or higher level.
Anda, mira, la aventura.
Definitely be getting an updated quick start adventure. It isn't ready right now, but it will be ready soon. So we're actively, I'm gonna leave this and I'm gonna go work on that. So we're actively working on updating that so that you're able to
Vale.
have that quick start
Vale.
adventure to use with your
Con un
players.
poco de suerte tenemos la aventura disponible esta semana.
Also, in development on many other pieces of ancillary
Por
content
favor.
for the game. We can't say what exactly that is yet, but know that we have more development
¿Cómo?
on many other pieces of
Ah,
ancillary
vale.
content for the game. We can't say what exactly that is
Vale.
yet, but know that we have more things coming that will help to augment play, that will help to give you guidance at higher levels of what kind of adventures you can do in these kinds of
Vale,
games.
Chachi.
All of that is in the works. This, as you can see from the work that we did on this, if you go look at the changelog and look at all the things that were changed, we really wanted to focus this period on making sure we were listening to your feedback, making mechanical changes, and then putting those back out into the world and seeing how those changes like went.
Yeah, these first iterations are on the bones. Like we want to try and get as much of the bones of the system as tight as possible with all of your feedback and playtesting, so that as we continue forward, we can focus on the little bells and whistles more as we get on the line. So very, very much appreciated.
Vale.
Can you talk a little about ending conditions for PCs? Is it as easy as making a roll? Does it take an action? And how does that play with the new stress mechanic? Will making making somebody vulnerable?
Yeah, so ending conditions for PCs, I'm assuming that means like when a PC has a condition on them, how do they end it? And this is a place where the game has leans into the narrative pretty heavily, meaning that like if you're vulnerable because a tree fell on you, you gotta get that tree off you before you're not vulnerable anymore, right? Like that is there will be certain narrative things that make sense of how you clear those. That might take a strength roll from somebody. Strength roll 15, right? To get somebody to like lift that tree off of you so that you can escape. And
Vale, esto ya es mecánicas, cómo utilizarlas. Es más de lo mismo.
Until you manage to and get rid of
certain abilities that characters have that are like, hey, if one of your allies is vulnerable, make them not vulnerable. Currently, you can
Si le quitas un estrés.
use that on a character that's vulnerable from stress and clear that condition.
Claro.
But that's something that might change depending on playtesting as we go. And if it's like, well, that felt like it was overpowered because now all of a sudden I can be at full
Es
stress
que, teniendo en cuenta que hay ciertas habilidades que limpian estrés constantemente, eso está muy OP, porque, hey, me pongo el estrés máximo, pero estoy vulnerable, pero, hey, no te preocupes, que yo voy a utilizar mi siguiente acción para quitarte ese estrés, ya no eres vulnerable.
Like
Bueno.
there are some edge cases there that I think are still being worked through, and we're playtesting all of that to see where you're vulnerable if you have all of your stress filled. Right, and your vulnerability is coming from that like shaken stature that you have.
As a person who has panic attacks, I feel it deeply.
Great. I'll do this. When some items or abilities reference time, for example, a new fairy's wings trait, how does time factor into the action tracker? So time is not something that is tracked as in like in rounds. It is very much a like
No
we
es.
are here
El tiempo en este juego es algo irrelevante. Totalmente.
at the table and the GM goes like,
No es como Dragones y Mazmorras, que sabes que una ronda son 6 segundos y puedes tener una medición de tiempo en la cual basar las acciones tanto de los enemigos como de los personajes. No es así.
all right, it's been 2 minutes. Your thing's gonna end, right? Like it is sort of judged more in the way that you would judge it in like traditional games when you're outside of combat.
Right, yeah. If you want to get specific, if it's like, a thing lasts 10 minutes and about the GM says 9 minutes in this combat starts, you can ask like how long do I have my wings? The GM could say, well, at this point, the next 12 action tokens, and then it goes away.
Claro.
But that, those are like the things that GM can kind of just like, a lot of other RPGs experience. You kind of decide in the fiction what makes sense, and then you all kind of go, okay, now that we have that set, that's what we're working
Eso vuelve a ser otra vez libre interpretación. Cada uno le gustará más o menos. A mí no me desagrada.
Most abilities that had time off the table for 1.2 and used other things like on your next roll with fear, for the fairy in specific. And we found that like there were some players that really liked that and some players that hated the like variability of that. I still really like it playing with okay, you can like implement that, but you're
¿Qué más?
Again,
Venga.
we have here, this is a fun one to play off. If a player has full stress and is vulnerable, if they are required to mark stress again, do they still mark 1 hit point as they did in 1.2?
Yeah.
Makes
Vale.
stress build. It's kind of a fun viability. Sometimes it's like, not about just doing the damage, it's just stressing them out at the point where they can't do anything again.
Yeah. The intention with the decoupling of hit points and stress previously, or damage thresholds and stress, I guess, is actually what it is, was to keep bookkeeping down and keep like analysis paralysis down. I'm like, okay, do I use more armor or less armor to be able to push this down? But the idea of stress, you becoming too stressed to the point where you start eating into your own health, is something that I still think is really fun and something we've kept implemented here.
I like it.
I like it.
stress builds. Have you been enjoying reading all the feedback from the surveys? Is there anything that surprised you about the response?
Vale, esto
Yeah,
nada, no nos interesa. Vale, pues esencialmente yo creo que aquí se va a acabar ya esto.
Is door adversary when?
Oh no. Okay. That's gonna have to be a
Big, it's gonna be
Lo de como pongan una puerta de adversario, meme interno.
environment, I think is what it is.
O como entorno, ¿te imaginas?
Layouts for larger adversaries are something that I'm really excited about.
Vale.
We got plans.
Yeah,
we got some fun
there's a
plans.
really
Vale.
fun with the idea.
Vale, pues yo creo que aquí ya se acaba.
Playtesting Daggerheart, helping us make it as best as it can possibly be for you. So grab Daggerheart 1.3 at daggerheart.com, Drive Through RPG, and Demiplane's Daggerheart Nexus.
Vale.
Get to play these new rules. Please let us know what you think through the player and GM surveys at daggerheart.com/play. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have fun rolling dice and playing.
Thanks, everybody.
Yay!
Vale. pues ahí se queda. No está mal. Es decir, es probar cosas por probar cosas, por intentar que todo quede súper cuadradito y que sea, pues, esencialmente un juego en fase beta. Probar, a ver qué es lo que cuadra, qué es lo que pega y seguir con eso. No es nada que no se haya visto ya. Lo que sí que hay algunos gestos, hay algunas acciones, algunas modificaciones que han hecho que de momento sobre el papel me resultan extrañas. Porque si tú, por ejemplo, con el tema del estrés, tú vas a terminar de marcar todos los estreses, te conviertes vulnerable, pero a la siguiente vez que tomes un punto de daño o daño por debajo de tu rango menor de daño, vas a seguir marcándote estrés. Estás haciendo más fácil que te conviertas en eso.
Disclaimer, I wrote this script like 5 times because rather than focus...
No sé. Por cierto, Bob World Builder, echarle un vistazo, buen tío.